We have with us none other than the Dr. James McClenon, who will present a group PK experiment testing psychical research and sociology of religion hypotheses, where the group, with an online weekly Zoom meeting since August 2019, experienced a wide variety of individual psy experiences with religious implications. Dr. McClenon is a retired sociology professor and licensed clinical social worker and has investigated psychic phenomena in many countries, including Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, China, India, among many others. His books include The Entity Letters, A Sociologist on the Trail of a Supernatural Mystery, and Wondrous Healing, Shamanism, Human Evolution, and the Origin of Religion. Without further ado, let's play Jim's presentation.
I'll be describing a group psychokinesis experiment, and we'll be testing hypotheses derived from psychical research and the sociology of religion. I've done field studies in a lot of different countries, participant observation studies of shamanic practitioners. They're very remarkable people. All of them have had histories of unusual experiences, anomalous experiences, and that makes them capable of putting on some very dynamic performances. And these rituals result in placebo effects and hypnotic effects. People are benefited by this. I've also conducted random sample surveys in USA, Japan, and China, and my students have collected a very large anomalous experience collection. What we did was we asked people, if you've had a very unusual experience, would you describe it briefly? In Northeast North Carolina, we found paranormal dreams, apparitions, spiritual healing, sleep paralysis, psychokinesis, out-of-body experience, religious experiences, other forms, particularly synchronicity, waking extrasensory perception, near-death experience, and UFOs. Here's a schematic diagram of the ritual healing theory. People have anomalous experiences in all societies, and these experiences lead to belief in spirits, souls, life after death, magical abilities. And these beliefs are the ideological foundation for shamanism, humankind's first religious form. So I refer to this as an experiential source theory. Experiences lead to belief. And people who have these beliefs exist in every society, and people who have a lot of anomalous experiences have very profound beliefs, and that makes them prime candidates to be shamanic practitioners. Shamanic practitioners perform rituals which have important impacts on their audiences. They produce placebo effects and hypnotic effects. And this hypothesis is not that controversial. We know that hypnotic effects and placebo effects are very powerful. So the performance of shamanic rituals over the last 70,000 years, according to the ritual healing theory, has had important evolutionary impacts. It's selected for genotypes associated with absorption, dissociation, and hypnotizability. So people who have those genes have had an evolutionary advantage, and these genes have been selected by shamanic rituals over the last 70,000 years. And we know that these propensities, absorption, dissociation, hypnotizability, are highly correlated with anomalous experience. So that's caused an evolutionary cycle to go around and around the last 70,000 years. We human beings have shaped ourselves so that we're quite different from animals. We have a propensity for spirituality and religiosity as a result. Ancient Asian traditions have found that meditation facilitates anomalous experience. The tribesmen in the Kalahari Desert, hunter-gatherers, they practice trance rituals around fires and have anomalous experiences and produce spiritual healings. The Native Americans in Canada and northern United States practiced tent-shaking rituals. They found that tents would shake, sides would shake in response to spiritual forces, seemingly psychokinesis. Kenneth Batcheldor offers a theory that explains group psychokinesis. He argues that fear of psi thwarts it. It thwarts psychokinesis. And another factor is the tendency for people not to wish to be considered the source of the phenomena. He refers to this as ownership resistance. So he argues that the table tipping groups, they sit in the darkness with their hands on the table, and due to unconscious muscular movements, the table seems to move around, and this is an artifact. And over time, the group can't tell what's real and what isn't, and that exposure to these artifacts helps them get over their fear of psi and their ownership resistance. So eventually, they develop sufficient belief so that authentic psychokinesis can occur. Now, Batcheldor suggested that group psychokinesis involves kind of a temporary disruption of the collective reality. And that idea isn't too far-fetched. Medical personnel and physiologists tell us that our brains do create our consciousness, our conception of this collective reality. Batcheldor experienced a decline in the phenomena, and he wasn't sure why, and he contacted Walter von Lukadal, whose theory offered an explanation for this. Lukadal combined psychical research theories or observations with quantum theory. And in quantum theory, there's the argument that quantum particles remain correlated even when separated, and this has been demonstrated empirically. Also, within quantum theory, the observation thwarts the decay. In other words, it stops the collapse of the wave function. This is known as the Zeno effect. A watched pot never boils. So Lukadal argued that psi involves quantum processes, and that entails a kind of observation effect. The observer thwarts the phenomena, especially skeptical observers. So as a result, psi has hiding qualities. The more scrutiny, the more documentation, then the less psi you experience. So Batcheldor reduced his scrutiny, and he found that the phenomena seemed to return. So the Toronto Parapsychological Research Society conducted a very interesting experiment. They wanted to contact a fictitious spirit which they had collectively created in their minds, and they meditated together, and then they wanted to see some kind of apparitional phenomena. They contacted Batcheldor. He suggested some kind of seance-like and relaxed atmosphere. They tried that. They got communicative raps, table tipping, table levitation, other PK. The results seemed to indicate that there was a collective ideology that facilitated this success, and perhaps a group consciousness involved, that you didn't actually need actual spirits. The collective group could create the phenomena. John G. Neihart was known as a poet laureate of the Plain State. He's also the author of the book Black Elk Speaks. He was very familiar with Lakota Sioux shamanism. He founded the Society for Research on Rapport and Telekinesis, or SIRAT, in 1961, and they started getting very powerful psychokinetic phenomena, communicative raps, table movements, levitations, earthquake effects, supports, matter through matter, and they engaged in a lot of photographs of levitating tables. I spent many decades conducting participant observation of the SIRAT group, and this is something that they continually tried to manifest. They would do table tipping experiments and try to get the table up in the air, and when it was up, they would grab their cameras and take pictures of it. SIRAT contacted J.B. Rhine, and Rhine sent his associate Ed Cox to investigate. And Ed Cox built what he called a mini lab. It was an inverted aquarium, sealed and locked, and it had micro switches in the floor so that if an object moved inside the mini lab, then that activated a film camera. And that resulted in about an hour's worth of very bizarre films showing psychokinetic phenomena inside the lab and objects moving in and out. And that created a lot of controversy, and there was an attempt to replicate the phenomenon that failed. But right here is the mini lab, one of Cox's mini labs that he constructed, which is associated with a lot of active phenomena. I had many unusual experiences investigating SIRAT, but I felt that I the only way I could be certain that the phenomena was authentic would be through organizing my own group. So I organized 4 groups, but we were never particularly successful in generating psychokinetic experience. It's difficult for modern people to come regularly to these kinds of things. But the Zoom technology allows a new situation. You can assemble psi-talented people in a group. So in 2018, I was able to get my book, The Entity Letters, published. It was a book about Surratt, and people started contacting me and wondering if there was any kind of new group being formed. So we put together a group, and we first met on August the 9th, 2019. 5 people. We met weekly on Zoom. I had 4 basic hypotheses. PK conducive people increase the potential for spontaneous experience in the group. The experiential source hypothesis argues that experiences generate belief. Shamanic effectiveness hypothesis is that people benefit either psychologically and physically from these kinds of practices. And the trickster hypothesis is that there's this unusual characteristic that psi has a hiding, quirky quality, which we don't completely understand, but is inherent within the nature of PK and ESP. During our first Zoom group meeting on August 9th, Kathy's plague mask on a mantle at her house flew off and fell onto the floor, a kind of poltergeist event. And then in March, her mother died, and she found a key lying outside her mother's apartment, and she had the intuitive feeling that this was a message from her mother. And then on the ride home on the train, beside her was a woman who was reading a book, and there were keys on the book cover. And then when she turned on her computer, there was an advertisement for keys on the computer screen. Then when she went out to her car, she found 3 keys on the ground. So this seemed very evidential to her. Her mother was indicating that she had survived her bodily death. Then Kathy also had a number of apparitional experiences. So this supports this experiential source theory. Ross had a series of experiences, synchronistic experiences, and I had sent an email suggesting that the entity John King might have caused the plague mask to fall off the mantle. And simultaneous with that message, she got another message from a man named John and another message from a man named King. So it all seemed to fit together. Then she also had many other kinds of experiences, anomalous lights and synchronistic experiences. And when she had a precognitive dream of turtles, something to do with eating turtles, which she found very offensive. And her daughter described an event in a restaurant where turtles were being served in the Chinese restaurant. And then immediately afterwards, she saw a photograph, and there was, she took this photograph. There were turtles that she saw on her way home. So this is I notice there's a pattern in people's experience. If a person has a series of one kind of experience, then you can predict that pattern will be replicated in the future. Boris in Germany had a long history of troubling poltergeist experiences, and he had electrical problems in his house. And the bills that he was receiving were just astronomical, and the electrical company couldn't figure out why. It was impossible to actually use that much electricity. So they attributed it to the poltergeist. Then while he was attending the group sessions, and his bicycle tire exploded, and later he found a pattern on his arm, and he took part in our metal bending experiment and was able to bend very effectively, and then found he could bend the metal on his own at home. He saw unexplained shadows, and then he took part in the micro lab pinwheel experiments. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Our group had many experiences while we were meeting. In January 2020, they started hearing electronic voice phenomena. A dog was barking. Now, the Zoom creates echoes, so these might be artifacts, and we understand that, but everyone would look to see where's the dog, February, they heard more electronic, particularly strong electronic voice phenomena. It sounded like someone speaking But there were also echo effects, which we attributed to Zoom. In April and May, we did computer drop ball experiments. And then the screen, the idea is to get the ball will fall down, it's kind of like a pinwheel. The idea is to move it's a randomly guided situation. So the idea is to move the ball towards the green side. The group did 3 experiments and they achieved statistical significance at the 0.02 level, And so I realized I'm with people who have psychokinetic ability. These people have a high potential for psi experience. So we started doing pinwheel experiments starting June 12th in 2020 and did a metal bending party, produced a lot of metal bends. The pinwheels were going around very, very strongly when the group was meeting, and they weren't turning at all when they weren't meeting. It was a very unusual phenomena. We did a remote viewing experiment, a series of 5 experiments. Here's a picture of water, and David was doing this experiment. He mentioned there's a whole lot of water in the image, so he was correct 4 out of 5 times. And this was tied into the stock market. We predicted the stock market would go up that day, and so I invested and made $36. So that's the kind of phenomena that we're producing. These are very, very interesting people, and they're capable of doing this kind of stuff. Now, the next slide, I'm going to be talking about my experiences, but it's hard to portray the emotional impact of these events, psi events. This particular image, I was sitting at this chair looking at these Surratt pictures, photographs of levitating tables here in the photo albums. They did this for decades, taking pictures of PK phenomena. So I was upstairs and this chair fell over backwards as a poltergeist-like event. And that's the kind of thing that was started to go on in my life. And I had no previous history of this event. I had witnessed group phenomena with Surratt's. I had only one precognitive dream as far as a spontaneous psi event. So it's very clear to me participating in this group launched a series of events in my own life. So here I list my experiences. In December 2019, I heard raps coming from the ceiling. I couldn't explain it. Then January the 31st, 2020, my poltergeist sent out emails from my computer, 7 emails, 2 of them to the journal, the editor of the Journal of Parapsychology. It's really an inexplicable event. March the 25th, we did an experiment. I set up a ritual altar to thank Saint Expeditus, and this photograph of Ed Cox flew forward during the night, and the stand flew backwards. A very unusual PK event. Then, of course, I told about the chair overturning, and my hearing aid batteries disappeared and reappeared later. Keys disappeared. Watch disappeared. Probably an artifact. Headlamp while I was backpacking fell to the ground, disappeared, and then later appeared inside my backpack down at the bottom. Meditation band. I was meditating very intensely during this time period for 2 hours every day. That may have contributed to this kind of burst of PK events, but here it reappeared right between the bed with a pen, which I figured that was some kind of symbolic event. They wanted me to write about it, I suppose. Here's a hearing aid, a section of this hearing aid. It disappeared, then it reappeared all connected right here in the container. Very strange. And then after 2020, there's been no more. The phenomena ended. The parapsychologist Lloyd Auerbach gave me this idea to do research with the pinwheels. So on June 12th, I brought in a pinwheel and I set up a cell phone camera so you could watch it, and closed off the air vent in my meditation room and closed the door, and then I could monitor the pinwheel from a distant room. And I observed that when it was shut in like that, the pinwheel stayed perfectly still, and it stayed still when I meditated in that room. Then when we met on June 12th, I was surprised that when the people started assembling for my group, the pinwheel started turning, and it would turned fairly continually. And then when I did a relaxation exercise meditation as part of the group meeting, a pinwheel would stop. And then when the exercise was over, it started up again. And then when the session was finished, it stopped turning. And it didn't turn for the rest of the week until the next meeting. So this seemed very surprising to me. Here's some of the experimental conditions. This is a mobile, and if the air in the room is disturbed, then it'll start turning. If you open the door and enter the room, typically it'll start moving while the pinwheels remain still. If you open the door slowly, the pinwheels will always stay still. But we found when the pinwheels turn and you put this glass cover, then the turning stops. So between June the 12th and August 27th, I grew used to a very unusual phenomena. I would observe the pinwheels every day and observe that they were still. And then when the experimental session began, when the people assembled, they would start turning, and then they would stop turning during the meditation session. And then they would, when that was completed, they'd start turning again. Then when the experimental session was over, they would stop turning. So we started playing little games, experiments. I got a brand new deck of cards, and I drew 7 cards, and then asked the people to try to guess whether they were red or black, and their guesses were at chance. But among those 7 cards, there were 2 jokers. Then each of us, I assigned each person a card, and we would discuss it. Then I put it back in the deck, and 2 of the participants got a 10 of spades, and I got the joker. It was a very improbable situation. So I felt like a kind of certainty that we're dealing with paranormal phenomena. And so that convinced me that I should tighten up my controls to try to preclude artifact. And so I started videotaping my control sessions after this. And then I would publish the results in my write-up each week when we had a Facebook page that we all checked in on. I'm going to show you a typical control session video. This time you'll see this top pinwheel turn perhaps about a quarter of a turn. That sometimes happens when you get the camera close to these pinwheels. It disturbs them a little bit, but in general they're still. Here's an early video documentation. The camera seems to stop it, but we did capture some pinwheel movement.
One's moving clockwise.
Yeah, now I think I need to talk for it to see. It's going. It's actually going. Wow, it really is going.
Look at that.
Okay, I hope it's recording.
Yeah, it looks like it is.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And the other one, the third one, that never moves.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully we got some images.
Oh, look at that. That's so cool.
Yeah, it really is starting to move now. Okay, I'm going to shut it down.
Yeah.
Here's an example of a movement after the session. Right after the session ends, I try to document the pinwheel movement, but the camera seems to kill it. Camera seems to kill it. Here's a chi-squared test looking at control versus test situations, highly significant. Now I realize this is not a formal experiment. So Boris set up this airtight plastic box with some pinwheels and other objects inside, and he had an action cam which documented the movement, took a photograph every 3 seconds. Then on July the 28th, early in the morning, he saw the pinwheel turning inside and got his cell phone and documented the movement. And then you'll hear him call on the Mullah Nasruddin, a trickster entity, to try and help it to make the pinwheel turn. And then later he found that the the action cam had documented much activity.
Are you there? Is this Nosradim? Are you there? Can you move some objects in the micro lab? That would be great. Nosradim, are you there? Are you turning the wheel? Are you turning the wheel, Nosradim? Who is turning the wheel? Who is turning the wheel? Who's turning the wheel? Nosradim, are you turning the wheel? Can you turn it again, please? Can you turn it again? Can you turn the wheel again, please? Yes, perfect. Perfect. That's so amazing. That is literally amazing. It's impossible. The box is absolutely airtight. There's no air movement inside this box. Jim, can you see this? This is for me. This is evidence. There's no way that wheel could turn. Nosradim, are you turning the wheel? Can you turn the wheel a little bit faster? Can you turn it again, please? And the other.
This is Boris's micro lab. It's a totally sealed container. The LED lamp does not give off any heat. When the pinwheel turns, this is an example of psychokinesis, something that we really don't understand, but which seems to be related to your beliefs. So I'll suggest to you that while you watch this wheel turn, you can relax and realize that your life can become holy, happy, and healthy. This is a video from August 12th, 2021. We're meeting and the pinwheels are very, very active. And then when we focus on them to try and document it, they freeze up at exactly the moment when the camera's on, and then they start moving again exactly when the camera turns off.
I'm glad to be part of this group. Very happy about it.
Says we got German. We're an international group here. And Pat, say hello to the camera.
Hello, camera. Hello, people. Happy to be here.
Okay, excellent. And now I'm going to set this down. I'm going to walk down the hall. I'm going to pound on the door, and we'll see how the pinwheels are doing.
Just for the wood.
Pick up pinwheels.
Hey, pinwheels, turn.
I think they actually stopped. Oh, now they're turning. They started
Did
again.
it work? Looks like Boris. Did it work?
To me, from where I'm sitting,
the pinwheels light up?
it looked as though they stopped when you knocked on the door, but then they started.
The pinwheels turned? Okay,
I thought they stopped briefly and then started again. That's what I saw.
There's a big video from August the 19th, 2021. Boris and I are engaged in a very extended conversation. We're ignoring the pinwheels, and all of a sudden there's some strange intermittent buzzing sound, and it activates the pinwheel camera. So suddenly they had been very, very active, and they suddenly stopped moving for the camera. So it's as if they want to reveal to us that they don't want to be videotaped.
Now it's gone. You're still recording?
I'm recording, yeah, and it recorded it just then. It was all still.
Holy. I think we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I know. It's grouping around with us. I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
I'm gonna carry this down there and see if I can activate it. I'll leave this here behind.
In the early phases, the phenomena was more robust than later on. And between June 2020 and May 2021, the wheels would be still before the session began. Then when the people arrived, they would start turning. They would typically stop turning during the meditation exercise and then start when it was over. Then in March 2021, we began video documentation during the session, and that seemed to thwart the movement. We found that emotional storytelling seemed to facilitate the movement, and sometimes there was motion after the sessions, but the phenomena began declining, and by summer 2021, the phenomena became increasingly ambiguous, and the trickster effect still was robust. So it was a bizarre experience. Boris was able to document pinwheel turning in a closed container. I think these hypotheses have been supported. The rate of spontaneous experience among this group has been very high, and for me, it has certainly increased. I had never in my life have had so many of these strange experiences. The experiential source hypothesis that people's beliefs have been shaped by their experience, it certainly has affected my belief system. With regard to the shamanic effect of this hypothesis, we need a little, perhaps more quantitative evaluation. The people express enthusiasm and feel like they've benefited. I think it's interesting to watch the progress of Boris rather than negative events, poltergeist events. It seems to be channeling his energy into making the pinwheel go around. The trickster hypothesis, I think, is very powerful support for that. We bring the camera out and the phenomena seems to decline and then end. So if you're interested in this kind of group, please feel free to email me. It's an ongoing experiment. This experiment supports the argument that groups can facilitate anomalous experiences and that these phenomena have trickster qualities. And as a result, they generate belief and not certainty. But that's at the heart of religion. Religion entails belief, and belief generates hypnotic and placebo effects.